हर साल बजट के बाद बहुत सारे लोग बहुत सारे टाइम एनर्जी और एफर्ट इन्वेस्ट करते हैं एक सवाल का जवाब ढूंढने में, विच इज कौन से वो सेक्टर्स हैं, कौन से वो स्टॉक्स हैं जो आउट परफॉर्म करेंगे मार्केट को, क्योंकि गवर्नमेंट ने उन सेक्टर्स में ज़्यादा एलोकेशन दी है बजट में। और ये सवाल कोई नहीं पूछ रहा है कि वेदर दिस मेक्स सेंस और नॉट। क्या ऐसा हिस्टोरिकल डेटा है जो बताता है कि गवर्नमेंट के हायर एलोकेशन की वजह से उन सेक्टर्स के स्टॉक प्राइसेस एक्चुअली डू बेटर ओवर द नेक्स्ट 6-12 मंथ्स? तो ये पहला टॉपिक होगा, इस वीडियो में हम डिस्कस करेंगे। सेकेंडली, विल ऑल्सो डिस्कस सर्टन सेक्टर्स दैट आर मोस्ट सेंसिटिव टू गवर्नमेंट स्पेंडिंग, बिकॉज अधिकतर स्पेंडिंग उन सेक्टर्स में गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से ही हो सकती है। वो कौन से सेक्टर्स हैं हम वो भी डिस्कस करेंगे। एंड थर्डली, विल डिस्कस द टॉप 3 सेक्टर्स जो आजकल मीडिया, यूट्यूब, हर जगह बोला जा रहा है कि क्योंकि इन सेक्टर्स में ज्यादा पैसा आएगा, देयरफॉर स्टॉक्स विल डू बेटर। मेरा एक ऑल्टरनेटिव पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू है, मैं वो शेयर करना चाहूंगा इन तीनों सेक्टर्स में, और क्यों मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि और भी फैक्टर्स हैं। इट इज नॉट सिंपली दैट हायर एलोकेशन विल लीड टू हायर स्टॉक प्राइसेस। सो ऑल ऑफ दैट विल डिस्कस इन दिस वीडियो। लेट्स गेट स्टार्टेड। सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, we look at some of the past data. There is a study that I came across. This is from 2002. This study is done by Ajay Shah and Susan Thomas. Ajay Shah also has a podcast, Everything is Everything. And I would highly recommend कि आप, if you're interested, you might like it. So this study shows that the stock market appears to be fairly efficient at information processing. This is not very useful for us. It also says that union budgets add 10% to the stock index on average and yield elevated volatility starting from the budget day for the following 30 trading days. So it basically says that up to the budget, up to the event date, around 10% on average returns are added. But post that, only the volatility is high. There are no incremental returns as such. This is a 30-year period, that is 30-day period that is being discussed in this study, and this is what it says. So there is no indication that says कि बहुत ऐसा कुछ फायदा हो जाएगा, at least in the very near term, 30 days. So for those who believe in trading, maybe this study should hint that it's not very useful. What about another study in 2014? This says that the markets are observed to rally positively towards the budget announcement dates, expecting good things from finance ministers. But it is found rare that the markets have reacted positively after. So again, even in 2014, around 12 years later, a similar kind of conclusion that is being reached. Thirdly, in 2024, this is the latest study, and this says that the results show that the budget does not have any significant impact on CNX Nifty. The impact of budget on average returns is not significant, whether in the pre or post budget period for short term, medium term, or long period. This one is basically saying, as we have progressed through time, 2002, 12, 24, basically what's happened is जो थोड़ा बहुत भी impact था around the budget, that has kind of been negated. It's completely kind of evened out. So it seems there is no particular advantage in trying to figure out कि कौन से stocks सही करेंगे, सही नहीं करेंगे, right? So at least the data suggests that. But obviously there are some contexts जहाँ पे इस पूरे exercise को करने में फायदा हो सकता है, and those sectors are those sectors that are highly sensitive to government spending. You will notice that this is a graph for government expenditure to GDP as a percentage of GDP. We can see that this is very cyclical, happens every few years, where government tends to spend more as a percentage of GDP. This is 1987, 1988, this is 2003, this is 07, 08, and this is 2021. Now, I'm sure most of you would have guessed those sectors that are very sensitive to government spending tend to be roads, basically infrastructure. So we have roads, we have bridges, we have companies that can do well. In the late, we have railways. Again, they did really well over the last 2-3 years. We have defense that did really well. So there are certain industries that perform very, very well based on how the budget, based on how much money the government is spending. But however, the point we are in this cycle, most of these stories have already played out. We know that defense definitely is a story that has played out big time. We also know that railways is a story that has played out so far. We know EPC companies did really well. So a lot of this has already played out, and उसका एक और रीजन है कि when there is a huge announcement in the budget, starting valuations for these sectors were really, really low because historically, there are long cycles. A lot of these sectors were ignored. Most of the companies, I would say, if not all, in such sectors are capital intensive. Their returns and profitability is very, very subdued during the down cycles. So because of that, the starting valuations were very attractive. That story has kind of more or less played out. Not to say कि आगे और नहीं हो सकता है in certain stocks, certain sectors, but just to give you an idea कौन से sectors में फायदा होता है इस exercise को करने का और शायद से किस context में फायदा नहीं होता है. So the underlying logic behind this higher allocation equals to higher stock prices, इस logic को भी हम question कर सकते हैं. So what this assumes is to go from A to B, it assumes that जितनी भी spending होगी, it will be timely and it will be fully done. Right? And secondly, the companies where this money is being spent, these companies are listed companies, or at least majority of these companies in these sectors are represented in the listed space, because even if the money is spent, it might be good for GDP, it might have other multiplier effects, but it might not necessarily lead to particular listed companies जहाँ पे profitability बढ़ेगी, and therefore you can invest and make money on. Right? So both of these assumptions have to kind of work out for this logic to kind of work. Right? And let's question each of these points separately. So we know that a lot of times, even if the government has planned to spend a certain amount of money, it's not always that 100% of that money is spent. Right? In fact, it is rare that 100% of that money is spent. And even this data, which is a very overall high level data, does not reflect on a granular level. There are many sectors that are planned to spend thousands of crores where close to no money is being spent, right? One of such sectors is the auto sector. There was a FAME subsidy that was ongoing. There were a lot of problems with the subsidy, and a lot of money was not spent because of these problems. Additionally, there are some years as well. So for example, FY25 happened to be one of those years जहाँ पे spending relatively compared to the last 2 years has been low because maybe elections, because heat waves, because you can add a number of reasons. But the point is that just because it has been allocated in the budget, it does not mean the money will actually be spent. And again, this data is very high level data, so it might not reflect how much variance there is between what the government decides to spend on and whether it actually gets spent. So the first assumption needs to be questioned, that just because बोल दिया expenditure हो जाएगा और सही तरीके से हो जाएगा, there are n number of bottlenecks that can actually happen in that process of spending that money. The second assumption is that your companies, the sectors where this money is supposed to go to, most of those companies are in the listed space. It might just be that even though the sector might do well, you as an investor might not be able to make money because not a lot of companies are there in the listed phase. So again, we'll use these two ideas and then move forward to discuss, what are those sectors. So currently where we are because of the budget, basically the question is कि ये जो 6,000 से 8,000 per month extra जो पैसा है वो कहाँ spend होगा. So according to this note by Axis Securities, in the new regime, if you have an income up to 13.25 lakh, you're saving 83,000. If your income is 15 lakhs, you're saving 20,000, and so on and so forth. So around 25 lakh up to 25 lakh, 25,000, you're saving the most amount of money, which is 1,14,000. So roughly the whole, I guess the investing world right now, at least around the budget, is concerned कि आप ये पैसा 6,000 से 8,000 जो रुपए है या जो भी है, 10,000, whatever. Where will you spend this money? How will you spend this money? And the easiest answer that is going, and most of the videos, most of the articles, what they're saying is that, of course, FMCG पे तो spending होगी ही, because 60% of the spending is discretionary spending, because पैसा जब आपके हाथ में आएगा तो आप ज़्यादा obviously FMCG पे ही खर्च करोगे. अब ये लॉजिक जो है मेरे हिसाब से काफी ओवर सिंप्लीफाइड है. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, लेट्स लुक एट द ट्रेंड. वी नो दैट FMCG volumes have been slowing down, particularly in the urban areas. Rural areas are still holding up well. So clearly, there is scope for FMCG volumes to come back again. But to say that because you have this extra 10,000 rupees in your pocket, FMCG volumes will necessarily improve, that might not be 100% accurate, right? So let's try to evaluate why that is the case. So first of all, निफ्टी एफएमसीजी को लेते हैं, क्योंकि काफी लोग ऐसा बोल रहे हैं क्योंकि पैसा आएगा तो ऑब्वियसली एफएमसीजी पे ही खर्च करोगे और कहाँ ही खर्च करोगे, सो देयरफॉर निफ्टी एफएमसीजी खरीद लो. So first of all, let's look at the overall impact that this incremental money can have. First of all, from a budget perspective, this extra income that is there in our hands as taxpayers, this will reduce government taxes by around 1 lakh crore. So basically impact जो होगा on an economic level, 1 lakh crore, sorry for the handwriting, 1 lakh crore extra जो है available होगा to be spent. Now, if you look at the sales of Nifty FMCG companies, it's 2,91,000. So 1 lakh crore अगर आप इस basis पे देखते हो तो ऐसा लगता है यार, this is nearly 33%, and that too every year. And you would say, wow, like if sales can go 33% every year, it's going to be fantastic. I think, again, this is a gross oversimplification. First of all, because the FMCG sector itself is around 10 lakh crore. If you look on a 10 lakh crore basis, it's 10%, still quite sizable. But it's not as sizable as you would think. You see the Nifty FMCG mein sales बढ़ जाएगी and all that, right? Secondly, it might also be the case that maybe you're choosing to not spend in the big companies. Maybe as an urban consumer where most of the spending is likely to go to, you are spending on D2C brands. Maybe you decide not to spend on FMCG as much. Maybe you have other avenues to spend. Maybe you want to spend in the capital markets. Maybe you want to reduce your existing high debt. So what I'm trying to say is that just because you have more money in the pocket, and again, we don't know how this money will be spent, it will be spent somewhere, but we don't necessarily know it will be on FMCG. So the idea that because more money equals more higher FMCG volumes and therefore profitability, this logic has a lot of gaps, at least in my opinion. I might be wrong, we'll find out. Another point is that these companies are already trading at multi-year highs, right? Surely starting valuations should also matter. If you look at, in the case of defense and railway stocks, the way they've done well because their starting valuations were very poor. They were ignored for so long. And so maybe that also played a big role. But because in FMCG already you're trading at multi-year highs, it not necessarily means that there is an investment opportunity here, even though volume growth might come back, right? So there are still a lot of ifs around this whole idea, okay? Thirdly, if you look at the FMCG index, it did go up around 5.7% in the budget week. Post that, it has been coming down. So at least in the very short term, the impact is not there. Again, I would like to think more from a slightly longer term perspective. But even in the short term, the market at least is not responding as positively as it was presumed ki response hoga, right? So those are some of the shortcomings when you say that higher allocation or higher money available will lead to higher FMCG stocks and all that. So I think it's too simplified. There are other factors at play also. Secondly, let's look at the auto EV components. Now, the commentary that's coming is that, if you look at, this is the number that is being cited. They're saying that PLI scheme में, auto में जो PLI scheme है, 300 crore से सीधे 2800 crore. So that's going to be a huge jump. And if you only look at PLI, you'll think that yes, this is a huge jump, and it is. But if you actually look at the overall budget allocated to the automobile sector, there's a scheme called FAME, Scheme for Faster Adoption and Manufacturing of Hybrid and Electric Vehicles. Okay, so this scheme was allotted 3921 crores, 3,921 crore 2024 फाइनेंशियल ईयर में स्पेंड हुए थे. बजट 2024-25 में इसका जो एलोकेशन था वो 2600 करोड़ था, बट स्पेंड सिर्फ 2050 करोड़ हुआ, right? Now, if you notice that this has been discontinued, and you can always almost see that this 2000 crores or somewhat has been allocated here, maybe slightly more than that, bringing the total up to 28 crores, 2800 crores. So in that context, now if you look at it, it's not necessarily a huge jump, right? Again, the numbers, the headline numbers at least that are being quoted in the media might be too simplistic, right? So that doesn't mean that you will not have an opportunity. In fact, I do believe that there might be opportunities in certain companies that have some special technologies around battery manufacturing, and that's something you can screen for, and I'll talk about that also. So again, if you look at the index, so it's been trending upwards for a few days, most likely in response to the positive news that automobile sector will get a positive fillip because of the budget, and therefore buy Nifty Auto Index. At least so far, it seems to be the case that the index is performing well. However, I would argue that again there is a slight problem with valuations here. If you look at the EPS, this is EPS growth, and this is the green line is the index. If you look at this, there's a huge correlation between when the EPS has been growing and when the index has been growing. Look at this huge surge. And already we are at, relatively, at least the higher end in this cycle. If we were to assume that this cycle has, kind of topped out, we don't know that yet, but it's not the case where the PE is only looking elevated, because on a PE basis, if you look, the PE of a median auto index stock is 30 times. So, maybe you'll say, hey, but so what? Earnings can also increase from here. To that, I will respond that actually the earnings for the auto sector are already at the higher end of the cycle. It is not like the earning itself is depressed and the valuations have moved forward, and therefore jaise earnings badhegi, there'll be a catch up or something like that. So already the PE seems to be extended. Already we seem to be somewhere on the top end of the earning cycle. So auto sector has done tremendously well in the recent history, right? So again, so that does not mean you cannot use this exercise to screen for certain companies. You can look into auto ancillaries. There are 115 listed companies in the auto anc space. Obviously, not all of them are making EV parts. So you could do a little bit more of a deep dive, go to Google, maybe, just read government documents and figure out what companies qualify for certain EV parts. And that can be your starting point. And maybe that way you can figure out some companies that are very well placed, that have some sort of competitive advantage. They have some sort of special technology that over the next 3, 4, 5 years, as EVs become more adopted, maybe that company can do very, very well. So, that's one way that you can use this whole exercise. The third sector I want to discuss is the Ministry of New and Renewable Sources, new and renewable energy. So clearly, this has been a sector that's been for focus 2024 में March financial year ending March 2024 में 35,000 spend हुए थे. Then there was a reduction to 30,000 in FY25, but the actual expenditure was around 1,000 crores more. Now this is where IREDA and SECI are spending on a lot of solar and wind tenders, right? Solar, we know solar is a recognized story. Solar stocks have done extremely well. We don't know. In fact, the valuations seem to be very frothy. In fact, the opposite seems to be happening, where even though the budget outlay is higher, I very much doubt that solar companies will continue to do as well as they have been. Also, even the wind companies, and I had invested in some of those wind companies. At the time, they were not discovered at all around March 2023 when Inox and Suzlon, these companies were going through some rapid changes. They were not recognized by the market. We know what has happened to valuations since then. So I think there is a value in doing this exercise, but only if starting valuations allow you to do that, only if that theme or that sector has already not been identified. At this point in time, at least the popular sectors that are being quoted by many media articles and YouTube videos, it seems to be, at least to me, and again, I could be wrong, that valuations are already on the higher end. Most of these themes have been discovered, and it might be that the stock price returns might not be as favorable as one is assuming. there might be other sectors that might be interesting, and maybe you can, try to go on that hunt if you like. So I hope this video has been useful. It's gone on for a little bit longer. I hope you like it, and please let me know in the comments if